Okay, so we are excited for tonight's workshop. Many of you in previous surveys and feedback that we've sought out have talked about wanting more support and resources around mental health and social emotional support. So we have two amazing guest speakers who are joining us tonight. One of them, Paige, many of you already know, I think all of you already know, who's a volunteer in our LIT program, and she's also a college coach. And Paige is also a local student from Santa Barbara, a graduate from USC. I don't think we have any of our Trojan friends on the call today. And she has worked in business and finance at Apple and is now in Santa Barbara and is very passionate about mental health. And then we are also joined by her mom, Michelle, who has been a mental health educator and advocate for the past 10 plus years. So these are two women who are really passionate about bringing this kind of knowledge to different demographics and students like yourselves who are in college. Stress is probably at an all-time high, as I heard many of you say, midterms and finals. And I remember those days really well. But it's more important now than ever to develop strategies around fostering positive mental health success and outlooks. So that's what we're here to do tonight. So I will hand it over to you, Paige and Michelle, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. All right, let me get our presentation pulled up. I'll share my screen, but we're mostly just going to be chatting. Presentations just kind of an additional background. All right, so got this here. Share. All right. Okay, can you guys see it?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so like Katie said, we're just going to do a quick intro, which Katie already did a great job on. We're going to chat about mental health. And then my mom and I are going to walk through a couple of resources, and then we are going to spend some time for questions. I know I have a few that different coaches and people have asked me about that I'll ask you, but we really do want to make sure if there's something you want to ask, feel free to ask it. If there's something you want to type in the chat, and maybe Katie can ask if you want to message it, anonymously, that's fine too. But this really is a safe place to talk about any questions. There's no weird questions or bad questions. I know this is often a topic that people are nervous to talk about, but you don't have to be with us. Okay, so you already know who I am. This is just my bio from last time. And we're here with my mom. So my mom was born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She's been in Santa Barbara though for over 35 years. She went to University of Minnesota and then came here to Santa Barbara for her master's degree in counseling, which she got from Antioch in career counseling. Fun fact, she's very curious. She loves polar bears, as do I, and football. I don't love football. I don't know much about sports. And then probably hunting sea glass. She spent over 10 years being an advocate and educator for mental health, as well as her own personal journey to mental health and wellness of over 25 years of lived experience dealing with mental health and mental illness. So that's a little bit about my mom. Anything else you want to share?
I think that's good.
Cool. Okay.
Well, what I would like to say, if I
Go
can
ahead.
interrupt for a second, and that is, first of all, congratulations to all of you. It's a big deal. College is a transition and it's a lot of stress. And the fact that you're in midterms, finals, various things, thank you for taking time to be here tonight, because that's impressive.
Okay, so I thought we could just jump in with why mental health is important. And we're just going to do this kind of Q&A style. So why is it important enough that you've spent so many years of your life not only trying to achieve happy, healthy mental health, which has been a cool journey for me to watch you do that really beautifully, as well as spending time teaching it to other people?
Well, I think a really important thing to share is that 1 in 5 people in the United States in any given 12 months will struggle with a mental health challenge or disorder. And so it's very common. And so based on those numbers, we don't have a large group today that are with us, but the expanded group is either someone in our group has been challenged by mental health illness or they know someone who has. So it's part of life that people think is rare. It's not rare at all.
Yeah, I agree. The next question I wanted to ask was just about, like, what do you think is the goal of understanding it? We talked about earlier, just like better understanding and lack of information. But we could also maybe just jump into.
Well, I think we'll come back to this to explain it a little bit more, but stigma is a big issue because, as I just mentioned, that in fact, it's not rare. It's very common. 1 in 5 is pretty common, but there's a lot of stigma around it. People don't like to talk about it. Although I will say that with COVID, the media has been much better than in the past about sharing the importance of talking.
Dentro de la patrulla, un oficial le dijo que la camioneta que conducía había sido reportada como robada. Entonces ella le pidió revisar los documentos de su vehículo nuevo.
On mute. All right. I think we're good now. Sorry. Gotta love Zoom struggles. I interrupted your train of thought. Should we go to what is mental health?
Yeah,
Just
I think
it?
before we talk about what mental illness is, it's important to know, what is considered mental health. And essentially it's a sense of well-being. One of the fun phrases that people have used a lot is to live, laugh, and love. And how I would define that as far as mental health is concerned, it's the ability to get through your daily activities, just the normal things of day-to-day life. Then it would be able to thrive in school or at work, depending on your situation, maybe both. To have healthy, positive relationships. I don't mean perfect relationships, but where you can engage and feel that it's a fulfilling relationship. And then another thing that I'd like to mention is resilience, the ability to respond to adversity or change in a way that is moving forward. It's not crushing. So,
yeah, that's helpful. Yeah. So if that's mental health, what would you say is the difference between mental health and mental illness?
Well, mental health and mental health challenges have a wide spectrum, and we'll explain that more in detail. But we have a little video that I think would be good to show because it sums up a lot of this in a it's very succinct and it's kind of fun. And I think it's a good way to move into the deeper part of this.
Okay, don't make fun of me. I couldn't figure out how to. I'm an Apple person. I did Keynote forever and I could not figure out how to embed the Vimeo into Google. So we're just going to watch it here. Give me 1 second. Okay. Is the video showing up, Katie?
Yes.
Mental health is a continuum. We all have mental health. Some people feel good, others have challenges. During our lives, we all move along the continuum, and 20% of us will have some kind of mental health difficulty. Of that group, 60% of us won't seek help. That's 4 million people facing it on their own because of fear. Fear of the stigma around mental health issues. Fear of false stereotypes that people with mental health issues are dangerous or broken, unpleasant to be around, that they're somehow unfit for the rest of their lives. We need to understand that we can recover from a mental health challenge. We can be dependable, productive colleagues, friendly, helpful neighbors, and loving, supportive parents. But we can't do it on our own. The support of loved ones is key to a successful recovery. How many of these 4 million are your friends or loved ones? How do you treat mental illness? When you hear the words mental health, depression, schizophrenia, or eating disorder, do you think of someone differently? We often abandon these people when they need us most. We'd never do that with other illnesses. When you were a kid, did you ever sign a cast? This person got to wear the support and love of their community on the part of their body that was mending. It's time we stop treating each other as broken when all we need is some mending. Lend support and understanding. Sometimes we all need somebody to lean on.
Obviously, that one's based in Toronto, in Canada, based on the statistics, but I still think
But
it's a good one.
the statistics worldwide would be fairly similar, which is surprising, I think, in some ways. But depression is probably the largest illness worldwide. That it's staggering. There's about 20 million people in the entire world that suffer from depression. So there are a lot of international differences and a lot of similarities. So,
Yeah. We talked about like the three different sides of things of like diagnosable illness and a physical illness, thinking, emotional behavior.
yeah.
You want to explain that?
Sure. If we're going to differentiate mental wellness or mental illness, the categories that we look at are thinking, it's how we're actually thinking, how we're feeling, so emotional, and actually behavioral and physical. So it has all of those components. I think the difference between a mental health challenge and a disorder or illness, challenge is a more catch-all term because it could be a very minor, short-term problem. And to be considered an illness or a diagnosable illness, it really has to be more severe and the duration is longer. But it does affect all parts of our body and our mind.
You mentioned it in the beginning, but a lot of times when people talk about mental health, we talked about stigma. Can we circle back to what stigma means to you and why it's important for this before we dive into it?
Sure. Well, if you think about the media, and as I said, the good news is it's changing with COVID, but when you think about the media, you only hear about the atrocities, the horrible things, and then somewhere in it is, a comment about the person's mental health. And the fact is that people suffering from a mental health problem, like a homeless person, okay, who has an illness, they are 11 times more likely to be the victim of a violent crime than to be the perpetrator. So when we hear about these tragedies like on-campus shootings or all these other things, that is not really the main thing. It's just what the media likes to do.
Yeah. I think the other thing is talking about why it matters to like in an individual's life and what barriers it can cause.
Right. I think that we look at what we see in the media, so that would be social. Then we look at our cultural background, and culture is a very broad term. And then we look at our family and the different environments that we are in, and how do people in those environments see mental health? Is it something that they will talk about? Is it something that is never talked about? And sometimes there's a lack of information, which I think is very common. Sometimes it's misunderstanding and false information.
Yeah.
So that's another reason I think it's important to talk about it, is we want to get correct information out to try to avoid misunderstanding and inaccurate information.
Yeah, I think that was helpful too. Like so I think I mentioned in this group that I was at Apple for 5 years and left last September. Wow, which is crazy. But one of the main reasons was me dealing with pretty severe depression, which isn't something I dealt with before. It was kind of like situational with everything going on in COVID and then my job changing. But even like knowing everything I know and having other mental health issues, I still like, until my therapist was like, you should maybe talk to your psychiatrist about this. And I did like one of the test things. I was like, oh, that is severe depression. And those are all the symptoms. So I think too, it's like a lot of times we don't even know what the things are, even if, I thought I knew a decent amount about mental health too, but sometimes when you're in it too, it's hard to see.
Absolutely. It's very hard to see when you're in it. For example, anxiety. Okay, we've talked about how a person can be having stress. Like right now, you're all under stress because of tests and papers and whatnot. And a little bit of stress is fine. One of my friends would say, well, if we have zero stress, we're not alive anymore because life has stress, okay? But when that stress becomes too intense or the duration becomes too long, then it shifts into being anxiety.
Yeah.
Okay? And anxiety, again, it can be on a spectrum, but the thing that differentiates anxiety from stress is it's like you're expecting something that's more of a threat than it maybe is. Okay. And one of the things about anxiety is you're either frequently focusing on something that happened already and you're feeling bad about it, or it's something coming that you're very, very nervous about. Okay. Yeah. And the thing that I find so distressing about anxiety is when a person's really struggling with anxiety, it steals the present. Okay, because either your mind is circling about something that happened and how you wish you had done it different, or you're very, very concerned about how everything could go wrong on something that's coming up. So It's an excessive fear and worry. And that's how I would differentiate it from stress. It becomes all encompassing and overwhelming.
Yeah. So those are kind of some of my experiences. How does it relate, or how do you think about it when it comes to like college students, and why is this an important time to talk about it?
Well, I mean, for a lot of reasons, obviously stress, you're in a new environment, you're maybe away from your circle of friends and your support system. You're just in a whole new environment. So that brings a whole amount of stress right there. And then sometimes it's very easy to be worried about how we present and our confidence. Suddenly we're in a new environment and we're worried, like, am I doing this right? Okay. So there are a lot of different stresses, but the homework schedule, the sleep schedule, the dorm, your roommate, it's just a lot of new things.
Yeah. With all of that, can we talk a little bit about what self-care means? I feel like it's become a bit more of like a buzzword, but I'm curious, and I think it'd be helpful for anyone, and especially students here, like, what does self-care look like in a college environment? And also I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but if anyone does have questions while we go, feel free and jump in, but we will leave space at the end too, but feel free to interrupt us at any time.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about the basic daily activities of eating and sleeping and getting a little exercise, college is very counterproductive to all those things. With studying and the amount of reading that suddenly we have to do, just the number of hours a day that it takes to do the work, that's a huge thing. Okay. And then the social things, you're out meeting new people, doing things, and frequently those things happen late at night. So getting enough sleep is definitely challenging. And then if you're eating in the dorms, let's face it, the food often is very carb focused. I think that's getting better though too. I don't know about your school specifically, but being able to have a healthy diet is more challenging, I think, especially like late night studying and that sort of thing. Getting enough exercise. If you're exhausted and you don't have any time to even get your homework done, it's sometimes hard to convince yourself to go out for a walk or a run or whatever it is that you like to do. The interesting thing from a mental health perspective is that if you're experiencing a mild form of anxiety or depression, believe it or not, getting the sleep, eating a little better, getting exercise, and definitely getting the exercise actually can be a huge benefit for minimizing or eradicating it. Now, if you have a severe problem, then medication and therapy and that sort of thing will come into it. But if it's still mild, the whole idea is, can we intervene early? So can we change some of these things that are putting more stress on us before it becomes a problem?
Yeah, I think for me, some of the like coping things that help me, I really like Glennon Doyle's book, and she talked about like the easy buttons that we lean to, which like for different people are different things, right? Whether it's like binging Netflix or like a giant box of cookies or the things that are like immediately. And sometimes that's fine. I also don't want to like put any like, pressure on like, oh, you can't ever do any of those things, right? Like sometimes that is how you decompress, but like figuring out what your like calm buttons are versus just your easy buttons. So like some of the ones she talked about that resonated with me are just like, if I'm like really in my head, like going on a walk and just like getting out of my environment, or like, I think I need X, Y, and Z, but like really what I just need is some water or some food. And I'm like pretty hangry. And so I think like figuring out those two, or like meditation or yoga or whatever, like, okay, if I'm in this space, like what are the things that have helped in the past? And I even have like a list of those that I refer to and like tried to memorize, because then it's like, okay, in the moment, it's sometimes hard to figure out, like when I'm like so stressed, I can't study for a test or like get my work done. Sometimes it gets to a point where you do have to stop in order to continue. And then like what fills your time in a way that's like maybe time conscious, right? Like you talked about, and I know all of these students are really busy. So it's like, what can I do that doesn't take 2 hours, but maybe like a walk around my building, or like going downstairs and getting like something to drink, water or whatever it is that'll help, can make a big difference.
Well, I think the basics, that's a really important point. Sometimes we haven't had enough water, something that simple that we can do. And Paige is talking about some of the things that she does to de-stress. Sometimes we do need to just step out of it, okay, and just leave it all compartmentalized over here and take, whether it's 5 minutes or an hour, whatever it is that you need, it is important to step out of that. And in the intro, Paige mentioned sea glass hunting. And so for me, walking on the beach and sea glass hunting is a great way for me to just kind of put everything aside and have a minute. And sometimes that walk is 15 minutes. Sometimes the walk is an hour and a half, depends on how good the sea glass is. So I don't think that self-care necessarily has to be hugely time consuming. It's amazing how sometimes just stepping outside, literally, if you either have a balcony or just going down to the door, and as Paige said, walk around the building, just getting some fresh air, change of scenery, and maybe getting something to drink can make a big difference.
Yeah, and breathing. I feel like it's
Oh,
cute
yes.
watching like the preschoolers now, they like teach how to do like breathing. And I'm like, why didn't they do that with us? Or it's like, I don't know. I'm also 10 years older than y'all, so maybe you did learn this in school.
Yeah.
But I think that makes a big difference. Even like the box breathing where it's like in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, or like things like tapping on either shoulder when you're really anxious, and just physical movements or breathing. Say you're in a space where like, all right, I can't go outside, you know, I'm stuck wherever I am, but I can like control my breath, and just focusing on that for a minute.
That is
help
actually,
too.
that is something that we have taught when we do elementary schools, is the breathing. So, and funny thing is, it works for adults too. So that's nice. And I think the other comment that you had about just like holding yourself, we're talking about anxiety. So I'm going to take it into another thing, and that's a panic attack. And I don't know if any of you have ever had a panic attack, but they're very common. And it just all of a sudden, you know, all the things about anxiety. So like, you know, feeling your chest be tight, or maybe even feeling a little bit dizzy. Okay, those different things, if you escalate that, they can become a panic attack. And the difference between anxiety or general anxiety and a panic attack is panic attacks are always time limited. Okay, and it varies from person to person, but statistically, most of the time, a panic attack is 10 minutes or shorter. Now, the recovery time from that could be a little longer. You may have to go to the walk, you may, you know, take a nap, something. But the thing to remember is that it is time limited, and it will stop. If it's severe, sometimes we feel like we're suffocating or we can't continue. And then it's a matter of what makes you comfortable. Some people need to, you know, get in bed, wrap up in a blanket, and that helps them calm down.
Yeah.
Other people may feel claustrophobic and need to go outside.
Like you.
No. So it's different. And if you've had a panic attack in the past and you found something that relieved it and helped you get through that, it's really important to keep track of that. And so let's say you have a roommate or someone that they're having a panic attack, okay? And you might want to ask them, have you had this before? And if they say yes, you say, well, what helped last time? Okay, because most of the time, if people have had them before, they know what's going to either help them or make it worse.
Yeah.
So ask them, just see what they have to say.
How do you know if it is a panic attack or not? Are there like specific?
Well, okay, as I said, it's just an intense version of anxiety, and let's look through some of the symptoms. It can be, let's see where, yeah. Did you have that one that had all the ones that we put on the?
Sorry.
Just to kind of, you know, run down the list.
Which things are you looking for?
Yeah, the bullet points. The bullet points. Do you have the one that has the bullet points? On the original? Yeah, that one. On anxiety.
Yes.
That one. Okay, so it's interesting because you can have depression and anxiety co-occurring. Somebody who is very anxious can feel depressed. Someone who's depressed can feel anxious. Okay, so these situations can be co-occurring. So some of the manifestations are similar and some are very different. So if we talk
Do you
about,
want to skip ahead? I didn't mean to skip ahead. Do you want to come back to that?
no, that's okay. So we talked about the fact that anxiety differs from stress in that it's unrealistic worry and fears. You might have racing thoughts or you might go blank. It could be restless and irritable. or feeling tense and jumpy, anticipating the worst outcome we mentioned. So those are some of the things that are happening emotionally. Physically, it could be the breathing, the racing pulse. Some people get kind of like perspiring, feels like it's having a heart attack. Okay, so those are some of the physical and behavioral. It depends on what kind of anxiety you're dealing with. But it could be social situations. Maybe you have social anxiety. Okay, so you might want to avoid that, or it might be phobic behaviors. We've heard about, afraid of snakes, afraid of spiders. It doesn't always have to be those. It could be speaking publicly. It could be, anything that stresses you out.
Mhm.
And insomnia, headaches, those are all physical things that can go with anxiety or depression.
Yeah. Okay. I know we wanted to talk about this. This kind of goes back to how things can progress on the continuum. Can you
Oh, yeah.
explain
Okay.
what this
Can
means?
they see the continuum?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we have this wellness and illness, and then all these different levels in between. The example I like to use is like, let's say I wake up and I have a little bit of a scratchy throat,
Mhm.
okay? And it's not a big deal, but it's a little bit scratchy. Or the next day, now I'm kind of coughing a little bit and my head is kind of stuffy.
You should probably take a COVID test.
Oh, yeah, bad example. This is a pre-COVID example. Okay, let's just finish this one anyway. Yeah, but so if it goes to pneumonia, okay, now we have a serious illness. Okay, so when something's mild, I mentioned earlier, like going for a walk, taking a 10-minute cat nap, changing your environment, those things can break the cycle when it's mild. Okay, when we get more into moderate, then it gets a little more challenging. It may be something where some therapy or talking with a friend even to kind of help, I call it venting, but get some of the stress out. Okay, and then if it continues to increase, that's when we really need to seek professional help. If you think about that, if you had pneumonia, you wouldn't just ignore it and stay home. You'd see a doctor, or you'd go to the hospital, you would get some treatment. Same thing with asthma. You have an inhaler, you have a medication. And mental health is very much like that. I think it's very important that we stop dividing mental health and physical health, because it's really all part of the same thing. And it's important that we change that perspective, community-wide and societally, because that's the only way that the stigma is going to come down, as well as silly things, not silly, but insurance.
Yeah.
Okay. So legislation and insurance has a big impact on how our healthcare as well as our mental health care.
Mhm.
So we need to put them in the same category.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, next one we were going to talk about, I think you kind of already went over this, is like the symptoms going from
Yeah.
emotional,
Yeah.
physical.
It affects
behavior.
all of our parts. It's
Yeah.
not just one thing.
And then these ones, I think my mom went through it, but I just wanted this to be in the slides
Yeah,
so
that's-
that
yeah.
anybody who wasn't able to join, or
Are
if
there
you
any-
want to,
Yeah, are there any on there that you have a question about or you want to comment on? Have you experienced any of those?
does anybody have any questions on the anxiety one?
I have a question.
Go for it.
Just about social anxiety. I feel like since post-COVID, like it's kind of like hard to navigate. Like I experience a lot of social anxiety and anxiety in general. So socially, it's really hard for me to push myself to like make new friends or just go out to an event or something. So do you have any tips or tricks to kind of work around that, to slowly get my body or like my mind adjusted to that kind of,
Mhm.
in my head, overwhelming setting?
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, I just want to clarify, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm a person with lived experience, and I advocate and educate. So I just need to give that disclaimer so that I'm just sharing with you from my personal experience and what I've learned with other people. Okay. Let's use an example of going to an event. Okay. Whether it's whether it's a social, a party, whatever, or if it's an actual, event of some other kind. One of the things that can help is if you have a friend, if you can do the buddy system, that can make a big difference, because then you don't feel so alone and you have someone that you can talk to. So that's one very good way. Another one is to sort of visualize it ahead of time, kind of mentally go through it and say, okay, what's this going to be like? What part scares me? What do I need to think about? And so kind of preparing yourself, going through the things that you're most concerned about so that you're not just caught up in that. Do any of those seem like they might be helpful?
Definitely. I do the buddy system all the time, but the second suggestion, that will help me a lot. Thank you.
Okay, sure, you bet.
I think, and too, knowing like you always have an option to excuse yourself too, right? Like, especially now going in like as adults in school, like knowing like sometimes it is going to be too much and just like building, right? It's not going to be all of a sudden, especially like, you know, being so isolated for a long time. And again, not a professional, there's just like my 2 cents, but like going from that, like it might be smaller and you might not be comfortable in like the same situations you were prior to COVID, and like giving yourself some grace and like time too, to be like, okay, this felt good this time. And then like, all right, not into it today, I'm going to bounce. Like, that's okay. You don't have to. I mean, I guess there are certain social settings, like if it's like a mandatory event or like class, probably not ideal. But, you know, if it is other stuff, just like understanding, and then also like using those breathing techniques or excusing yourself, using the restroom, recollecting, whatever you need to just like move forward and through it. And also knowing like it is temporary.
Yes. Well, and an interesting, another thing that you can do besides the breathing that seems so simple, but actually makes a difference. It's like if you sit down in a chair, you put both feet on the floor and you put a hand on each knee. Okay, so you sit down in a chair with, you know, kind of good posture and just put your hands on your knees. And it seems so silly and so easy, but it's a grounding thing. Okay, so when you're feeling anxious, there's something about this, and that just your feet on the floor, your hands on there, it just gives you sort of a centered feeling and a grounded feeling. So that's another small technique that you can implement. Okay.
Thank
And
you.
I think, I'm sorry.
She said thank you.
Oh,
Thank
okay. Yeah. And I think that, again, incremental is very important. Don't expect yourself to jump tall buildings right away. Okay.
I like that. Do you want to talk at all a little bit more about depression? I feel like we went more
Yeah.
into anxiety.
Yeah, we did. Oh,
Sorry.
where to start? Yeah. Depression, when I describe it, if it's actually a severe depression, it's like a cold, gray feeling. Okay, and we lose our the energy to continue forward. And so it can be a lack of interest in activities that normally you like, and it would be fine. It can go into a feeling of hopelessness, like nothing I'm doing is working. And from there, you know, then it can go into self-blame that, oh, I'm just a loser. Okay. It can even have confusion and a hard time making decisions. I can remember at a point when I was really depressed, but I was hungry. I opened the refrigerator and looked in the fridge, and it was too hard to make a decision. I couldn't pick something, so I just didn't eat. Okay, so it can be overwhelming emotionally. Then when we go into the physical side, fatigue is generally something that you associate with depression. Loss of appetite or increase in appetite. It can go either way, and it's very individual. Some people they can't eat, and some people then start binge eating on things just to sort of make them feel better. Excuse me. Same thing with sleeping. Some people they can't sleep, and some people they just sleep all the time. And I think typically with depression, we assume that people are going to sleep more, but that's not always the case. It can be insomnia. Sorry. Okay. And behaviorally, again, it's just signs of fatigue and just not quite doing things the way you normally would. So that's the beginning side of depression. And as we showed on the continuum, it can continue from there. But if it's in the early stages, then the self-care can do a lot to help turn that around.
Yeah, I think a lot of times too, and I want to be mindful going into this topic because I know on the harder end of this, like we think about, which can be a trigger like for people. So I just want to give anybody, if this is like a topic that's too hard to listen to, feel free to mute and we'll like put in the chat box when we're done. But I think it is important when talking about this to talk about suicide. And I know
Unfortunately,
it touches
yes.
a lot of people. Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes.
Can you just help us understand a little bit about it?
As I started talking about depression, the thing of feeling worthless and self-loathing and just not good enough, the biggest threat with a severe mental illness is the threat of injury to self or others. And clearly suicide is injury to self. And it can go both ways. People can want to talk to somebody about it and people can keep it hidden. Okay. So the question is, do we want to look at some of the signs and symptoms, or do we want to go with the other part first?
I think we were gonna, sorry, I've got my notes right here, but kind of just, I didn't put this on the slides, but just talking about like warning signs for it probably would be the most helpful, as well as like then what to do if it's somebody you know, or yourself.
Well, I think that's an important point. Is it yourself that's feeling this way, or is it someone else? Okay. If it's yourself, get help. Tell somebody, I'm struggling, I need help. Okay. The worst thing you can do is to hide it and not face it. Okay. So if you're really feeling that badly, I can't overstate how important it is. Now, the good news is the fact that you're in college. Many of the schools that you mentioned have excellent healthcare and mental health services. They have support groups, they have counselors available. And I was always amazed at how many people didn't know what was available.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure how your school does it, but there's usually something related to the health center or health and wellness. And health and wellness can deal with the minor things like the yoga class, the mindfulness, and that sort of thing. The professional side would be dealing with severe depression, anxiety, or thoughts of suicide. So let's just walk through some of the signs, whether you may not see them in yourself, but if you see this in a friend or loved one, they're red flags and there's something to pay attention to. So obviously, if they're threatening to kill themselves, that's a very obvious one. Okay. And we'll talk about some ways to talk with them about that. And if they're looking, if they're collecting pills or they're looking for a weapon, then that's imminent and there needs to be intervention immediately. Social media, if it's gone dark, okay, if they're usually kind of upbeat or they're usually focused on something and then now suddenly it's gone very negative and very down, or they're actually talking about, dying, death, suicide, those topics, we have to take it seriously.
Yeah.
And I think, high school, you're going to prom, okay, and you think of kind of like, Legally Blonde or something like that. Oh my God, if she has the same dress, I'm going to kill myself. Okay, clearly that's not a serious thing. But if someone is talking like, I just don't think I can do this anymore. It's just too hard. I just don't think I want to be here anymore. That's serious and it's real and we can't ignore it. They may be talking about feelings of worthlessness, lack of purpose. And when they start withdrawing from the normal activities, like they're not interested in the things that they used to do, or they're withdrawing from friends and family, that's a big red flag. Another thing is that they might be in obviously increased alcohol and drug use, is a potential signal for mental health challenges of any kind.
Self-medicating.
Yes, self-medicating. You feel terrible, so you're trying to make yourself feel better. Okay, and in the short term, it might help, but unfortunately, both alcohol is one of the biggest depressants that you can deal with, and it limits your ability to make good decisions. It disinhibits. So when you're depressed, alcohol is not a good thing to mix with it.
We talk about these two, kind of some of the myths, and then also like what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think two of the biggest myths about suicide is that, number one, talking about suicide will put the idea in a person's mind. Well, I don't know how old you were when you understood what that word meant. Okay, but I think it was probably before high school. Okay, I think it was probably a long time before that. So mentioning it isn't going to give them a new idea like, oh, I didn't know about that. That's not usually how it is.
Mhm.
So talking about it does not put it in the person's mind. The second one is someone who talks about suicide is not really serious. You know, I used that example a minute ago.
That's a myth.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a myth is that if somebody's talking about it, you need to take it seriously and assume that they are serious and get them help and intervention.
Can you talk about how to do that?
Yeah. So
Thank
this
you,
part.
that's right, yeah.
Okay. Well, if you believe that the threat is imminent, that they are in a position where they could hurt themselves or someone else, then you basically have 2 or 3 choices. If there's a weapon present, anytime there's a weapon present, that's a 911 call. That's not a decision. If it's a crisis situation where they are threatening their life, but they're not threatening anyone else, then you need to find out, are they willing to get help? So in other words, if you offer to take them to the emergency room, or if you offer to walk them to the counseling center, that sort of thing, that's fine, that's good. If they're not willing to participate, then it also could be a 911 call. But the thing about if you do make a 911 call that is so important, and that is that you tell the operator, you tell the person you're talking to that this is a mental health emergency, because either they may send different resources or the way they will approach it, hopefully it will be much different.
I think we've seen a lot of that, you know, in the news and a lot of hard situations. So I think that's a really important thing to mention too, but not to necessarily, especially there's like campus security and different things too. So understanding what your school's protocols are for it too. But
Because
mentioning that to an operator, especially.
And if your school does have good services available, that's always a good place to start. If it's not imminent threat, if they're just, they call it suicidal ideation, if they're kind of thinking about it and talking about it, but they're not imminent, then taking advantage of your school resources is a good way to approach that. Another point that's really important is you never, ever, ever leave someone alone that you think may be suicidal. Okay. Now, let's say you have a final, okay, and your academic success is depending on you making it to this final. That doesn't mean that you necessarily have to stay with that person. And even you may not even be the best person to stay with them. If they have a close friend or someone that can be with them, that's perfectly fine, an RA, whatever, but you never leave someone alone.
I know we're running out of time too.
okay,
Sorry, I
sorry.
know, but this is important. So I think like what you said of offering immediate support, be a link to professional help, provide information and resources, and then encourage self-help. And then I think it applies to not just this like situation, but also this is kind of ways. So you already talked about like concern, crisis, and emergency a little bit, but then asking people things, whether it's about anything, if it's as serious as suicide or even anxiety or overwhelm, and just things that I liked the questions that you mentioned here about like saying, I've noticed, or I'm wondering. And
some good conversation starters that can help in any situation. To show interest and care is the first and most important thing in any of these situations we're talking about. If someone feels that you genuinely care and have an interest in them, that's one of the kindest, most important things you can do. But some of the phrases that are helpful is, I've noticed that. Okay, so if you've noticed that someone's not going to class, or you've noticed that someone's working out 4 times a day, start with what you've noticed, because that takes out the judgment. Then they are less likely to feel that you're judging them. Okay, so I've noticed this and I'm wondering about that. Okay, again, no judgment. Now, if they say, no, I'm fine, then that means they're not ready to talk about it and you probably need to table it. But, keep it in your memory. And if you get another opportunity, because the whole idea is to build bridges, not walls. Okay. And if so I've noticed, I'm wondering, please tell me more. Okay. And those are some easy phrases to sort of keep available, because they'll help you with any difficult conversation.
I had one other question kind of along these lines. So what if like yourself or a friend, they're in a situation, and I know like people have talked about this, like, I just can't do this, like school wise, not like self-harm necessarily, but like I'm totally burned out. Like I'm ready to like leave. Like I'm just so overwhelmed. I can't do this. Is there anything like to either, whether that's you or a friend, that you'd recommend on like how to cope, especially going into like these new environments where you just feel like, is it burnout? Is it overwhelm? Is it stress? And like, how do you kind of take a step back and figure out what to do next?
Well, one of the things that I would think about is step back and say, I'm not alone. Okay, and all of this, you are not alone. You are not the only person that's going through this. Okay, so whether you feel like you'd like to talk to someone, either professional or a peer mentor, there are a lot of peer mentoring arrangements where just give you an opportunity to vent, because sometimes the venting is enough. Okay. The other things that we've talked about, you know, as far as taking care of yourself, self-care, and it's just, I think, very important not to give up. Okay, and whether it's in the school situation or another difficult situation, asking for help, getting help, and not being afraid to say, this is really hard right now, and I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to try. And sometimes we have to try more than once. You know, it doesn't always work out perfect the first time, but that's where the resilience comes in, and you want to try again.
What if not everyone's mom is a mental health coach and they like don't necessarily know how to talk to their parents about it, or like nervous to talk to your friends? What do you recommend for people where I'm feeling these feelings, but I don't know if my parents will understand, or I don't know where to go first? How do you help somebody through that situation?
Well, I think that's one of the benefits of being college students and being on campus, because there are just so many. UCSB, who I've worked most closely with as far as this sort of training, they have tons of resources. And so one of the things is just be aware of what the resources are on your campus. So that's very important. Who is your most trusted person in your life? Who's the person that you feel most comfortable talking to? That's probably a good place to start. And test the water.
Yeah.
You know?
I think too, even sometimes like for really, even maybe it's a different situation, but sometimes too, like it's harder to talk to your family first, and you can go to like even a friend, even if it's not your best friend too, like somebody who's not like so involved in your life that they're gonna, I don't know, talk about it. Sometimes it's nice to get like a neutral party. And I know for the wellness center, sometimes there's long waits and other things too. So like asking for other resources, say you can't get into a therapist, or like your health insurance as a student doesn't cover it, or whatever it might be, or you're trying to help a friend and they're not, like we're going to list some websites and show them too. But like also you can email me if you want help, like resource directing. Obviously I can't, you know, I'm not a trained professional either, but I know in college, like it wasn't until later in college that I found a lot of these things.
Well, yeah, and I think that knowing what peer support groups are available, and if you have a friend, if it's not you and you're concerned about a friend, look down wherever it is in your school that lists the peer support and the other groups.
Usually the health center and stuff too
The
has
health center,
information.
yeah, health and wellness of any
whatever
kind.
it's
That's a
called.
good place to go.
But yeah, I think that's the end. I know this one a little bit longer. These are some, my mom spent a lot of time kind of dialing into some specific resources, and we'll send these out to maybe via email after. But there's so many really helpful things, and these are trusted websites that mental health professionals use on different issues.
And I appreciate that point. Two things. The mental wellness support online has gotten so much better. It's amazing. And because we have been sort of isolated, online support has gotten 100 times better. So these resources are legitimate. The other thing is be careful about Googling things or just going on Instagram or whatever.
Yeah.
Start with a resource like we have listed, and they will maybe refer you to others from there. But it's very important that you're getting good information.
I think that's all of our presentation. I want to make sure we leave time for questions. We're happy to stay a little bit longer too if anyone has questions afterwards. But I also just want to say thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. And
pleasure.
hopefully it was helpful. So yeah, any questions?
It was kind of a lot person fast.
Yeah.
A little like drinking.
She
out of a
usually
fire
does an
hose.
8-hour class, and we tried to get this into like, you know, a little bit shorter. So that was our attempt. So hopefully it was still helpful.
Yeah, 90 minutes is about the shortest that we usually do this. So if we got a little bit off track, it's because we were trying to get so much in.
Does anyone have any questions, comments? Now's your time.
I don't have a question. Just wanted to say it's like super informative. Really like this. Brings a lot of light to the situation, especially for like, I guess like machista culture and like Hispanic families and stuff. especially for like men having to hide like their emotions most of the time. So I think there's like a very like important topic that should be brought into like more cultures overall. And you guys did a really great job.
And thank you for sharing that, because the good news is a lot of the websites that we're sharing with you, they deal with many different cultural and ethnic situations. And so you, in general, it's tougher for men, I think, to address these things. Women are stereotypically more inclined to talk about these things. So cheers to you for even being willing to comment, but you will be, I think, pleasantly surprised at these resources that they really do address diversity of many kinds.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It's easy. I feel like we kind of look and sound like the typical people, like the stereotypical people that would talk about this. It's like white women sitting here too. And so I think that is important to note that like culturally, it's just really different. And I think knowing that, you know, what you said, it's okay to talk about this stuff. And sometimes not everyone in your peer group will agree with that, but just figuring out what's right and healthy for you is important.
And one of the things I will mention when you look at the resources, there's an organization called NAMI, capital NAMI.org, NAMI. And that whole organization is dedicated to helping families and loved ones and friends of people who are struggling with a mental health problem. So, you know, if your family is not comfortable with this conversation, that's a really good site to go to, because it can help you decide what you can talk to your family about and how you might want to go about that. So.
Oh, this is a great question too. Somebody asked, do you have any recommendations for managing test anxiety? I personally get really overwhelmed during test times, so I try to just deal with it, but I'm sure there are ways that are more efficient. You can think about it.
Yeah, I don't know if I can give you specific examples, but I know that there are a lot of, many colleges have peer support as well as professional support for test taking. And all the things that we've talked about in terms of general self-care still apply, but I don't have any professional personal knowledge of specifically test anxiety, but it's real. It's a very real thing. And that's with all of these different applications. Don't assume that, oh, it's just in your head. It's very real. And so for the test anxiety, I would encourage you to check with the counseling center and what available things are there, but then the general self-care.
Katie or Kim, have you had, just in your experience with more students, is there anything or resources that you've found that talk about test anxiety?
You always do this, Paige. You read my mind.
Oh, good.
No, and I was just going to say to everybody, Mission Scholars has a remarkable professional local woman who helps students with test anxiety. So if that's something that you'd like to explore and talk to her, and she's had a lot of success already, you know, with the SAT, ACT, but it's the same thing with just generalized testing. Be in touch with us, whomever you're most comfortable with. Let us know, and we'll set you up with her, and you can talk to her. So
sounds better than our tips and tricks.
I'm glad you're involved in this call.
Awesome.
Your resources are amazing. So
yeah, no. Because of generous volunteers that all really believe in what the hard work that everybody's doing on this screen.
Yeah, we even had an in-person workshop. I don't know if anyone on the call attended, but I believe that was last summer, focused specifically on test anxiety with a local therapist who gave strategies. So we don't have a recording of that since it was in person, but I have some handouts. And some students were home from college and they asked very specific questions about finals and what do I do and what does it look like? And so we went through some of those examples. So yeah, reach out and we will share those with you.
That's awesome.
I wonder if what do we want to go into any of this?
We're also gonna, why don't we send it via email just because we're out of time, but we also have, we did this printout of like helpful things to say. So we'll include that in the email as well as I'll add it into the PowerPoint of just things like, what do you say? Do you want to give one example quick?
Okay, what this exercise is things that you could be helpful anytime, things that might be helpful and things that would definitely not be helpful.
Do you want to give like one of each?
Okay.
Then we'll close.
Okay, so one is like pull yourself together. That is pretty much a shutdown and a judgment. So we wouldn't want to do that. Another one though might be, wow, it seems like you're, struggling with that. Maybe we could go have coffee or a cup of tea and talk about this more. Because again, it shows the care and concern. One of the really ridiculous ones is, oh, PMS again, huh? So in other words, you're just reacting to the person and some behavior without stepping back and thinking about it. And it's just important to think about how we phrase it so that it comes off as showing interest and concern, not judgment.
I think that's good too, because like I know too, like I've probably said stuff in the moment too, and so like thinking about how to respond to it ahead of time, but then also being able to say like if somebody comes back like, oh, like I should have, I didn't realize like I should have taken that more seriously or that kind of thing, and like knowing we'll make mistakes and we're not always going to handle these situations perfectly. Like we don't have we don't teach about this in school and know about it as much as we should, and so like understanding there are resources and people out there to talk about, and like it's okay to make mistakes and learn, and asking for help is.
Well, and I think you touched on an important point there, and that is it's never wrong to go back and readdress it, and say, wow, I didn't think about that before I said it, or, I think I may have hurt your feelings and I want to just tell you that was not my intention. So I think that's important because in the moment we don't always get it right. Okay. And we won't always get it right, but not being afraid to go back and address it with someone that you care about is, I think, essential.
Any final questions from students before we wrap up? Okay, well, thank you, Paige and Michelle. That was so valuable. I wish I had access to this information years and years ago, but I'm glad it's becoming more, it's getting the attention it deserves, especially with COVID and just the widespread mental health challenges and illnesses that students face around the globe. So thank you for bringing your expertise and insights and being so honest too about what you've walked through. And that's just a really great way for us to realize it's so common, and there's strategies in place. And all of you have the Mission Scholars Support Network as a support system, in addition to your networks of support with your family and on campus and your friends. But we want you to know you can always reach out for resources and support. And we can stay on the call after too, if anyone wants to hang out, has questions. But as a part 2 to this summer, we're going to be launching a mindfulness course, a 4-week mindfulness course. And it will be in person in Santa Barbara, just one class a week, and it's just 1 hour for 4 weeks. So we will be sending out details, but it's open to all Mission Scholars. It's totally optional, of course, but we're really hoping a lot of students sign up. So far, we've gotten really positive feedback. It will be facilitated by a local therapist who wants to just equip students with more access, like we talked about, breathing techniques and strategies, and just bringing more mindfulness to every day as a way to combat some stress and anxiety and depression that we face. So stay tuned. I'll be sending that out. That's kind of like a part 2 to this discussion. And then, I want to thank our speakers, Paige and Michelle. That was amazing. You guys are ready for the speaking circuit. You did so great. This could have been like a webinar or something. It was incredible.
Thanks. We were nervous too. So this is our first time. So like, if you're ever nervous, this is our first time doing it, but we had fun.
And being in an older generation, the whole Zoom concept is kind of new and scary for me.
Yeah.
So, I have to admit, I was quite nervous.
Yes. Well, that's a good lesson. Even if you're nervous, you feel the nerves, but do it anyways. That's how we really grow, when you're stepping out of your comfort zone and just challenging yourself. So thank you both. And then we'll hang on the call if anyone wants to hang out for a little bit and ask questions or check in.
Thanks.
Otherwise, thank you all for taking time out of your day to be here with us tonight.